Cyber and physical security risks are constantly evolving and continue to pose a growing threat to the reliability of the nation's electric power system. Much of the attention over the past decade has focused heavily on digital intrusions to the operations that keep America's lights on. This year saw a series of physical attacks on power substations that made headlines as thousands lost power. A Politico analysis of federal records reported that assaults on electric delivery systems are at their highest level since 2012. You're listening to Energy Solutions, a podcast from the Electric Power Supply Association. I'm your host, Todd Snitchler. This episode's guest is Manny Cancel. Manny's a senior vice president at the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC. He's also the chief executive officer of the Electricity Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or the E-ISAC, which works to reduce cyber and physical security risks to the electric industry across North America. In his role, he has a frontline look at the scope of threats facing the electric system, as well as the significant work being done by industry, government, and other stakeholders to share information, shore up their defenses, and respond in real time to developing attacks. Here's Manny. Well, good morning, Manny, and thank you for joining us today for the EPSA podcast. We're grateful that you have taken some time to chat with us a little bit. For those that don't know, Manny runs the E-ISAC, and I'm going to let him do a better job of explaining what the E-ISAC is than I can do. So for listeners that may not know, can you tell us what the E-ISAC is and how does it work with NERC to promote electric reliability and the stability and safety of the grid?
Sure. And first, thanks for having us here. Appreciate the opportunity. So the E-ISAC is essentially a clearinghouse of security-related information, both physical and cybersecurity threat information. And we make sure that our members, which are about 1,500 members across the United States and Canada, are aware of the latest threat information, as well as risk mitigation techniques and other pertinent information. Another big role that the E-ISAC has is to be the conduit between the electricity sector and the U.S. government agencies and the Canadian government agencies, right? So DHS, DOE, in some cases DOD, and other agencies, and not only at the federal level, but at the state and local level as well. And regarding how we work with NERC, to be clear, the E-ISAC is part of NERC, is a division of NERC. And we share thematic information with our colleagues and me at NERC to sort of help inform what steps it should take regarding electric reliability. To be clear, the ISAC is not a compliance management or enforcement organization. We have no role in any respect of that. Matter of fact, we have a code of conduct that prohibits us from doing that. So we don't share attributable information with our colleagues at NERC or any other CMAP organization.
Manny, you mentioned that there are 1,500 members. For those that maybe aren't as aware of what you do, who do those 1,500 organizations represent, or what areas of the industry are they?
They're the asset owners and operators of the electricity system in North America, right? So these are utilities. They could be investor-owned utilities, public power, municipal power utilities, or city-run utilities. They are generators. In some cases, they are renewable energy providers or aggregators. But the overwhelming majority are sort of traditional asset owner and operators that provide electric service to our customers here in the United States and Canada. About a quarter of those 1,500 members are also what we call partners. So they're the trade associations like EPSA, EEI, NRECA, APPA. Our government partners, FERC, DOE, DHS as well, and other regional partners as well, state and local governments, etc.
Well, that is a very useful, I think, baseline setting for folks that may not be familiar. So let's kind of talk a little bit, I don't want to call it the weeds, but a little down a level or two. Clearly, everyone over the last few months has seen some headline generating events related to grid reliability, the substation vandalism attacks in, the Southeast and in the Northwest, growing concern over cybersecurity as it relates to critical infrastructure. Of course, ever since it's been a little over a year now since the war in Ukraine started, and there's been concerns about cyber related issues. As someone who's in the trenches every day and sees these at a different level of detail than perhaps many of our listeners, what are your takeaways from those events? Are there things to observe or lessons to be learned, or things that we should be making note of as you view it from your seat?
Well, look, I think the biggest takeaway and what I typically share when I discuss this is that it is a very complex and arguably overwhelming threat landscape, right? So when you
Mm-hmm.
look at the universe of cybersecurity threats that are impacting the electricity sector, the capabilities of large nation state adversaries, to disrupt critical infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
as well as what we've seen in the physical threats or physical security incidents, it can be overwhelming. But that being said, I also feel pretty good about where we are with this. We've been taking security as a sector seriously for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
decades, right? We didn't just wake up and become sensitized to these issues. There are many robust programs in place. The grid itself has a great deal of resilience built into it. And I think our partnership, particularly at the federal level, has never been stronger, right? We continue to work very closely with our
Mm-hmm.
partners at DOE and DHS. And that really, I think helps us maybe not stay ahead, but well, maybe stay ahead and be able to adequately respond to these threats as we move forward.
You raised the issue, I think, that many are concerned about is, some of these are existing threats and the industry has been very aware of them for some time. Some may be new threats. There was just a report in yesterday, I think, or this morning's Wall Street Journal, that talked about the number of events ticking up. So clearly there's an increase. Are there things from your view that we ought to be doing as an industry? Are there steps to be taken, or are we well situated where we are? I mean, clearly we all need to be adjusting behavior based on the conditions as we find them, but you kind of have an overview of the entire system. I'm curious your thoughts from that perspective.
Yeah, I would say first of all, not all these threats are new, or the outcomes that could
Mm-hmm.
be that could result from these threats are new. I think we know that the Director of National Intelligence in their worldwide threat assessment tells us every year that the big nation state adversaries have the capability to
Mm-hmm.
disrupt critical infrastructure here in the United States. Um, so again, it's accepting that and making sure that we continue to introduce the adequate protections, monitors, and really, when you think about any security program, it's about being able to detect or prevent first,
Mm-hmm.
the threat, detect it, and then respond and mitigate, right, the impact of the threat. So I think we've got a lot in place there. I think the challenge as we go forward is making sure that we're sharing information across the board, right? So again, we're only strong when we are, maintain situational awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these physical security incidents have also underscored the need for situational awareness and sharing. Going forward, we're probably going to see things like perhaps more regulation. We know the there's potentially a national cyber strategy that will be
Right.
released that may call for things like that. FERC has ordered NERC to take a look at the SIP 14 standards,
Mm-hmm.
particularly as it relates to some of the substations, to see if that standard should apply more broadly to different classes of assets. Now, to be clear, we don't think standards are the answer to everything, right?
Sure.
And probably applying them broadly doesn't make a lot of sense. But that being said, there is merit to sort of looking at this thing in a more risk-based way and
Mm-hmm.
deciding what are the prudent, no regrets, and hopefully cost-effective measures that we could take to further secure the grid.
As you look at the situation, I mean, you've talked about obviously existing and emerging threats. You see things that are happening. Is there one area or one threat or trend that is, causing you the greatest amount of concern, or is it unfortunately an equal opportunity concern landscape where you look out and say, yeah, I'm concerned about it all. But are there things that you look and kind of peek around the corner and say, these are the things that keep me up at night?
Yeah, sure. And while we do look at it, my biggest area of concern is the impact on critical infrastructure. So specifically, the ability to compromise operational technology or
Mm-hmm.
industrial control systems. So
Yep.
the systems that run the grid, right? And we've seen these capabilities mature, grow, be used, and you've seen this played out in the Russia-Ukraine conflict as well too.
Yep.
Last week, I believe there was an article that indicated that Russia was close to using some of these tools, these toolkits that they put together to disrupt critical infrastructure here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a reality. It is a reality, and that's probably the thing that has me sleeping with one eye open.
Yeah, and that would do it. I mean, that story I think certainly raised a lot of eyebrows. So what can be done or what is being done that we want to talk about that can help mitigate or address some of these threats? I mean, folks are probably familiar with the shields up, meaning, raise your attention, be vigilant about updates and some of those things. But what are some of the specific things that that either ought to be done or are being done that are helpful? And I think, as you noted a moment ago, we're going to hear about some other things that may yet need to be added to that list of things in order to ensure that we're doing the best we can to protect the infrastructure and the grid from compromise.
Yeah. So again, as I mentioned earlier, again, this is a threat vector that we take really seriously, right? And spend a lot of time talking about as a sector writ large.
Sure.
That being said, there are things that we can continue to work on. And I mentioned one before is making sure we're sharing information, right?
Yeah.
The other is continuing to support our partners at all levels of the government, federal, state, local, and making sure they understand what we're doing, right? And understanding what the risk is to us and obviously the potential impacts to their constituents, right? Losing power on a large scale is something that we all want to avoid, right?
Agreed.
Um, I'm also a big believer in monitoring, networks, and you probably know as well, FERC has ordered NERC to develop a standard regarding network
Yep.
monitoring, particularly in industrial control environments. President Biden, a couple of years ago, started a 100-day sprint where he called for the implementation of these monitors. You can't protect what you can't monitor or don't know about, right? So
Yep.
big believer in sort of getting these things. And what I like about them is that they're relatively low cost and it's sort of machine to machine and allows us to gather data about what the threat landscape looks like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, just staying aware of what, the latest, these adversaries are very sophisticated. They pivot, they change, they're persistent.
Mm-hmm.
So maintaining our awareness about that collectively as a sector is important.
You mentioned a couple times information sharing, and I think that's an important point for us to just chat a little more about, which is the concern historically has sometimes been that the information that is shared is stale or it's not useful. The opportunity to utilize that information is past. Do you see that improving, or are there still things that can be done to make that as close to real time as possible to ensure that entities across the board are able to have access to that information?
Yeah, look, I see it as improving, and actually a key element of our own business strategy at the ISAC is to make sure that we get out timely and actionable information.
Yep.
So the good news is I think we do that, and I think we do a really good job of that. The bad news is that we do that and we do a good job of it.
Yeah, my inbox would reflect that.
That's right. And I think, what we need to make sure that we are doing is really sensitizing people to the most critical issues, right? And many of them are critical, right? But particularly for organizations that may not have the resources to sort of adequately respond to these things, this is how the sector can work together, and really maybe curate how we share information, right? That being said, if somebody feels the need or wants to share information, or more importantly needs information, we encourage them to do that, right? Share what you want on our portal, put it
Sure.
out there. People will read it. We have metrics that show that. But more
Mhm.
importantly, if you need information, please reach out.
It sounds like you kind of walked into one of my other questions, which is, how can asset owners work more closely or be more effective in their engagement with the E-ISAC? And it sounds like the first thing they can do is to be more thoughtful and deliberate about information sharing. Are there other things that you think about as, the person who runs the organization? Like this would be great if asset owners would also do some of these other things that would help me be more effective at our job here at the E-ISAC.
Yeah, I think some of it relates to what I just mentioned. Give us some feedback on the quantity and quality of information that
Okay.
you're providing. Is it useful? Do you need more information? Is there other things that we can sort of bring to the table? I think, look, again, getting back to what I said earlier, this sector has done a great job responding, but,
Mhm.
it's a what have you done for me lately sort of environment.
Yep.
we can share what other things are being done. So if you look at what's going on in the physical security arena,
Mm-hmm.
utilities are not waiting for new standards to come out. They're already taking action, right? They're looking at new technologies. They're looking at implementing, cost-effective, no regrets move to improve their physical security posture. That goes on in the cyber side too, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no one silver bullet here or one tool, and we are completely technology and vendor agnostic, right? But we just have to continue sharing what we're doing to protect against these threats.
I want to pivot a little bit, but it kind of stays in the same vein because we're hearing a lot more about electrification of the economy, which suggests a number of new data points that could be points of entry for an ever increasing threat landscape or area for bad actors to try and get access. Is that something that the E-ISAC is focused on, or is that somewhere that you envision, further opportunities for mischief that require an even more vigilant or a broader review of potential access points to the system?
Yeah, so first, let me start out by saying we are, supporters of anything that improves reliability, maybe lowers our exposure to climate change issues and things like that. And
Sure.
so electrification is a great example.
Yep.
That being said, as you point out, electrification increases the attack vector, right? More things that I could take advantage of, right?
Yep.
And probably on the distribution side, or behind the meter in some cases, which is not really under NERC's jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think here is again an opportunity to work with the states to make sure that we prospectively build in cyber controls into these new systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
So really wouldn't do us any good if the bulk power system is well protected, but the adversaries are able to take down,
Right.
large recharging fleets and things like that, right? Or get to the distribution networks, right? So I do think, there's an opportunity to really have that conversation. The other piece, which NERC is more focused on, is making sure that we're thinking about reliability, right?
Of course.
Of course we want to electrify, we want to do these things, but we have to think about what this means to reliability.
Yep.
Is there adequate fuel, to generate power, those sort of things.
It's almost like you're reading my mind here on my next question. So you talked in the past about the E-ISAC's efforts to expand its membership to include gas utilities. And of course, that would provide them access to the portal, cyber and physical security bulletins, other benefits that would be, I think, helpful to them as it is to the electric industry. And certainly we've voiced support for those efforts in our comments to the Reliability Technical Conference. So can you talk a little bit about that issue and kind of how you view it?
Yeah, so and a lot of people may not know this, but we have a long history of working very closely with the natural gas sector,
Mm-hmm.
primarily the downstream natural gas. But we work with the other trade association and their members, oil
Yep.
and natural gas, and do that. But specifically, we provide threat intelligence, both bidirectional threat intelligence to the downstream natural gas ISAC. We do some data analysis as they started to implement, sensors in their OT networks as well.
Mm-hmm.
We include them in our grid exercises like GridX and
Yep.
GridSecCon. So really do a lot there. That being said, there's more to do. And when you think about the threats, and they are part of, they're one of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors,
Yep.
exposed to the same threats, right? So what are they doing? How can we learn from them? I think there can be more conversation. When you look at the TSA security directives and how they, compare to the NERC standards, I think they compare favorably, but there's probably things we can think about, as we go forward.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly making sure that they're protected, given that they are a critical fuel for electricity generation is imperative. And again, I think those conversations are continuing to take place and go on.
Yeah, and we share your point of view on that. It's critically important that this holistic approach be taken because it is growing more tighter and tighter in alignment, and the gaps between the two systems are not beneficial. So we need to do what we can to try to remedy those. So with that in mind, what counsel would you offer to policymakers, or what would you want them to know about the power system and what's needed from a security perspective? Because sometimes I think they're asked to make decisions that they don't have the level of technical capability that you and your team may have, or some do and some don't. But as you think about it, what are things that policymakers ought to be keeping in mind so that they can be additive to enhancing security of the system?
Yeah, so I think they know this, but I think it's always important to remind them that, again, what I've said earlier, this is a sector that's been taking the threat environment very seriously and has done a lot of work. We are
Hmm.
the only sector with mandatory and enforceable standards. And again, I'm not a proponent of standards being the silver bullet, but
Sure.
it's something that has served us well, as we've gone forward. Um, that being said, though, as you look at the threat landscape and thinking about how we could protect ourselves, whether it is the introduction of new sensors, whether it is hardening physical security assets, whether it's designing networks differently so they're more resilient,
Hmm.
and they're fairly resilient now, but could you design networks to be more resilient to
Hmm.
kinetic attacks or physical attacks, right? The answer is probably yes. And so we need to have a discussion. But all these things cost money, right?
Sure.
Too. And at the end of the day, it's you and I as ratepayers that pay this. So it's got to be done in a cost-effective way that adequately buys down the risk. And then the collateral benefit is that it increases reliability.
Hmm.
And so when we talk with policymakers, that's the commercial we keep focusing on. And certainly the broader reliability issues that I referred to earlier, fuel assurance, electrification, all those other things play into this.
Yeah. This conversation can be pretty overwhelming, I think, if you're a relative novice to the space. So what are a handful of actions that you think that individuals can take to secure their own data or our own electric reliability? I mean, clearly there are steps that most organizations take to kind of watch against phishing and those kind of issues, but as a security expert with your background, what are a handful of things that you think people ought to be mindful of, that we all do our part and incrementally the benefits are substantial?
Yeah, to the first part of your question, again, I always like to reinforce, and again, by no means am I dismissing the severity of this issue, but we operate a really resilient grid, right? The electric power system in the United States and Canada is, arguably one of the most complicated machines that mankind has built.
Agreed.
And it is resilient. It has lots of protective measures that keep power flowing, and it's what ensures the lifestyle that we enjoy here in North America. Um, that being said, security is a personal thing, right? And you may not think, but when you think about electrification, right? And people having chargers in their house or
Hmm.
smart cars, smart appliances, you have to protect those things, right? They don't connect directly to your utility, but they could.
Hmm.
They could be an entry point, and probably not a vector that the adversaries are looking at yet. But the adversaries will always look at any vector to see
Yep.
what they could do. But you look for your own, obviously, for your own personal well-being and the well-being of your family, protecting your identity, paying attention to cyber hygiene, watch what you do on the internet, use strong passwords. That sort of stuff is always, critically important.
Sure. You've had a long career in the energy and cyber industry, and that could be one of two things. It could either mean that you're continuing to be excited about the industry and what's happening because we do have a resilient but evolving grid and things are changing, or it could cause you to be awake a lot at night and feel really concerned about things. It seems like you're kind of leaning more towards the former. So what makes you optimistic about our ability to be effective defenders of the system and also to stay ahead of the adversaries? Because I think that's in the end what everybody in the sector is, of course, trying to do.
Yeah, so I occasionally get accused of being a cynical New Yorker, but that being said, I do see the glass as half full right here. And if you look at the transition that the energy industry has made, when I joined it, 40 years ago, you know, sort of a glacial pace of change, right?
Yeah.
It's completely flipped now, where change is fast and furious.
Mm-hmm.
The business models are changing, the challenges are changing, the security issues are changing, and so it's always good to have a challenge. I could do less with the security challenges, but that being said, I
Sure.
think it is an opportunity to rework what energy looks like going forward and doing
Mm-hmm.
that in a reliable way. And yeah, that's what I get gassed about, right? And understanding what our adversaries, we can't be Pollyannish about this. We have to
Sure.
understand that the security landscape exists for a reason. Our adversaries, will want to use it for their advantage. Hopefully not. in a very destructive way, and we likely do the same here. So it's important to stay ahead of that and help inform that from a policy perspective, right? We don't establish policy, but we do have a responsibility as a sector to help inform policy.
That's right. One last question. You talk about innovation, and we certainly are supportive of it as well. I mean, do you look at innovation as the way for us to continue to stay ahead of the situation, or innovation is going to happen and we're going to have to deal with security related issues kind of in parallel, or are they so inextricably linked that as we see new technologies come onto the system or new services that are available, that's going to have the benefit of both hardening the grid and also ensuring greater reliability? And we have to balance that with the potential for exposure, or do you view the innovation as pointing in the right direction, that we're getting the double benefit of improving operations and also being resistant to intrusions from bad actors?
Yeah, I think it's hard to make a blanket statement, Todd, but look, we're all for the appropriate application of innovative technologies,
Sure.
processes, and procedures, new fuel sources or energy sources, 100% behind that, right? But again, I think what we want to do is probably start doing a better job of prospectively building in security or having a conversation about security.
Yeah.
Because it's harder to do retrospectively, right?
Yep.
And it's more costly to do retrospectively, right? So again, I think that's the opportunity in front of us, and I've already started to see a shift in that direction, right, as we go forward. I think that just needs to continue.
Great. Well, Manny, we certainly appreciate you taking time to chat with us this morning. We're very excited to have you join us for the Competitive Power Summit on March 21st here in Washington, and know that you'll be an excellent panelist as we talk about a lot of these cyber and physical related security issues. So thank you again for your time, and we certainly appreciate you being with us.
Thanks, Todd. Always great to talk to you. Really appreciate it.
Providing reliable power generation is the top priority for EPSA and our member companies. As a member of the E-ISAC, we continue to monitor evolving threats, participate in information sharing exercises, and secure operations, offering a unique contribution from the perspective of generators operating in a competitive electricity market that provide about 150,000 megawatts of electricity capacity to the nation. But as Manny shared, it's a constantly moving target that's enough to keep anyone awake at night. Manny will be joining us on March 21st at our Competitive Power Summit to discuss this constantly evolving issue with other cybersecurity experts, including representatives from the FBI and the Department of Energy's Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. We hope you can join us there. Visit EPSA's website to register at epsa.org. Thanks for listening to Energy Solutions. If you like this episode, please share it on social media with your coworkers, friends, and family. You can also connect with us on Twitter at EPSA News and on LinkedIn. And subscribe, follow, leave a rating, or comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Energy Solutions is brought to you by the Electric Power Supply Association. EPSA represents America's competitive power suppliers, which bring about 150,000 megawatts of power generation resources to customers throughout the United States. Discover the power of competition at www.epsa.org.